And I hope you'll see everything in American musical theater. This is lecture number 13, and we're continuing to talk about Sondheim. What you're listening to right now is Pacific Overtures, written by Stephen Sondheim.
Where they came and where they went, I was part of the event. I was someone in a tree.
In 1976, during the celebration of the country's bicentennial, Stephen Sondheim and Hal Prince were exploring the dark side of American imperialism in Pacific Overtures. This show was set in 19th century Japan. John Weidman's story was told by an all-male Asian cast, and it was all done in kabuki style. Very risky, very artistic. Wonderful theater.
I was only 10.
I see men and matting. Some are old, some chatting.
If it happened, I was there. I saw everything. I was someone in a tree.
Tell him what I see.
Some of them have gold on their coats.
One of them has...
It was a daring, courageous thing that they had done, and they were extremely proud of it. And it was a huge success from the artist's perspective. Commercially, not so much. The reviewers didn't like it. It was a flop. But even now, as we look back at it, and people produce it still now, in the long run, it was a success. Throughout the 1970s, Sondheim and Prince defied the optimistic conventions of the musical. Theatrical nostalgia had turned bitter in their production of Follies, which was an operetta scored. And it was about a theater that was going to be torn down, and all of the showgirls that had been there, their spirits were still in the theater. Then there was an operetta scored in 3/4 time, which was called A Little Night Music. It was fraught with anxiety. Lots of affairs going on and strange relationships. In 1979, they adapted The Unthinkable into a Broadway musical. It was a tale of slaughter and cannibalism set in 19th century London, featuring the murderous Baba, Sweeney Todd. You might have seen the Johnny Depp movie, but if you didn't see Angela Lansbury and Len Cariou on Broadway, you missed something. I thought it would be fun to take you there a little bit. If you haven't seen it, you can see the movie. I'm sure it's on Netflix or YouTube or somewhere. And their goal was to see if they could scare a contemporary audience the same way that movies can scare you. I think they did a pretty good job, and I loved it. I thought the music really carried the characters and really took us places that we hadn't been before. Feel that scariness.
But then the tale of Sweeney Todd. His skin was pale and his eye was odd. He shaved the faces of gentlemen who never thereafter were heard of again. He trod a path that you have trod, did Sweeney Todd, the demon barber of Fleet Street.
He kept a shop in London town, a fancy place and good renown. And what if none of their souls were saved? They went to their maker impeccably shaved. By Sweeney Todd, the demon barber of Fleet Street.
Scary, huh?
Each would knew his room was bare. A long bow and a fancy chair.
That duo, Sondheim and Hal Prince, always wanted to go somewhere fresh and new. Sweeney Todd didn't hurt people's fear. It went into people's fears. It wasn't meant to scare you and leave you triggered. It was really meant to thrill you. I'm much more interested in having an experience in the theater, which is unlike any other experience.
Sweeney was subtle, Sweeney would think, and rats would scuttle. Sweeney was sinuous, Sweeney was big and red and tiny. Sweeney was, Sweeney was, Sweeney was, Sweeney was, Sweeney was, Sweeney, Sweeney, Sweeney. Attend the tale of Sweeney Todd.
Sweeney Todd is the grisly tale of a barber falsely convicted of a crime who returns to London seeking revenge. His victims' bodies are disposed of by cooking them into tasty meat pies. You want to notice how Sondheim uses this opening number, one on the street. All of these people talking about who this guy is, having this very rumbling music, very low, and it's in as low a key as possible. This feeling of suspense is always there. It's always with this sly crescendo, as if we're leading into something that's about to happen. And we don't know what that is. There's this feeling of suspense throughout the whole show. So the feeling is sort of like lifting the ice a little bit, then dropping it, then lifting it, then dropping it. The composer might hear subtleties that nobody else gets, but that detail to the art and that craft of creating a song for a musical with a specific character and situation in mind is difficult. For Sweeney Todd, that low rumbling into a feeling of suspense creates a mood, and I don't think anyone would argue that the opening moments of the play are very creepy indeed. Now, with this grisly tale of cannibalism, Sweeney is out for revenge. He's been exiled, and while he was exiled, his wife was raped and he thinks killed, and the child that is his, Joanna, is adopted by a governor, by a high official, and he would like revenge for his wife's death. What he doesn't know is she's still alive. She's just crazy and she's a homeless person. But he goes into business with a Mrs. Lovett, who owns a meat pie store on the floor beneath him. And in this meat pie store, she takes the bodies and turns them into meat pies. Getting meat at that time apparently was very difficult, so it served both of their purposes. And here was a grisly song that used the humor of, if you were going to cook sturgeon or flounder or a cod, you might talk about how they taste. Well, if you're going to be cooking people, you get more of this flavor.
What is that?
It's free.
Is it really good?
It's too good. I mean, then again, they don't come mixing all the flavor, so it's pretty fresh.
Awful lot of fat.
And when it's fat,
Haven't you got poet or something like that?
now you see the trouble with poets, and your now is deceased. Try the priest.
Not as hearty as Bishop, perhaps, but then not as bland as Curative.
And good for business too. Always keeps you wanting more. Trouble is we only get it in Sunday. Lawyers rather nice.
If it's for a price.
Order something else, go too far. Since no one should swallow it twice.
All jokes about people's professions and what they might taste like. The last line of the first act of Bond's play, which is what they used as the material for Sweeney Todd. Bond wrote a play called Sweeney Todd. It was also a penny dreadful in London long before that. The last line of that first act in Bond's play, as they fall into each other's arms with laughter, And Stephen Sondheim thought, oh, this is the moment to sing about. And what they're laughing at then, and I thought, they're laughing at the prospect of what people taste like, which is perfect for a horror movie.
You smell it and notice how well it's been greased. Set capriced. Now this may be a bit stringy, but then of course it's fiddle player.
No, this isn't fiddle player. It's piccolo player.
How can you tell?
It's piping hot.
Then blow on it first.
The story of the world, my sweet,
Oh, Mr. Todd, what does it tell?
is who gets eaten and who gets to eat.
And Mr. Todd, who gets the sound?
But fortunately, it's also clear that everybody
Goes down well with beer. It's a little dark. Sondheim's dark vision had moved the musical to where an audience could identify with a tale of murder and cannibalism. As the scores intertwined arias and they reached their climax, Sweeney Todd enacts his vengeance on society in one of the most beautiful songs of the early 70s.
I think may we proceed, sir?
There's that suspense.
Pretty women, fascinating, sipping coffee, dancing. Pretty women are a wonder. Pretty women, sitting in the window, standing on the stair. Something in them cheers the air. Pretty women, silhouetted, stay within you, glancing, stay forever, reading like this. Pretty women, blowing out their candles, or combing out their hair. They leave and when they leave and vanish, they still are there when you are. Pretty women at the mirror in their garden, letter writing, or picking, weather watching, or they make a man sing. Roof of heaven, eyes are living. Pretty women, sir, pretty women, here's to pretty women, all the pretty women. Pretty, oh, Adam, marries me Sunday, everything.
And at that moment, he's hoping to kill the judge that he thinks killed his wife. But they are interrupted. So the suspense continues. Here we are. Revenge is a universal feeling, whether people will admit it or not, and that's what this piece is really about. So even though it's dark and it's scary and it's a horror movie on stage, it appeals to the audience through that feeling of satisfying a revenge. It's in its revenge, I think the audience senses that they can identify with Sweeney Todd. Musicals have always tried to keep the dark side of the culture out of the frame. And that's why I brought up in the discussion prompt, what's your dark side? Or what's the piece that you hide or you surprise people with? It's part of what makes us deep and complex and makes us interesting as humans. We all contain multitudes. None of us are any one thing, and we like to try to go just with what we see from what we see right now, right here. We don't know people. We don't listen to their backgrounds or their histories or even understand where they're coming from half the time. But in this, in order to understand and appeal to the side of Sweeney Todd who has the right to feel revenge, Stephen Sondheim had to create a very, very complex character. Sondheim was the first person to try to sing about that darkness, that dark side of the character. The ultimate expression of that in his work would be Sweeney Todd, which is, I think, a masterpiece. In a way, Sondheim had a complete disregard, a courageous disregard for what the public is maybe going to like or not like. As Mary Rogers, Richard Rogers' daughter, had said, audiences should damn well work a little harder and listen, even if the subject matter is distasteful to some people. Here's another beautiful song from Sweeney Todd, just to give you a little bit more of the flavor. You've got the organ. They use that in Phantom of the Opera with Andrew Lloyd Webber. You get the little bit of the scariness in there. There's a real beauty to it. Almost church-like, really. From tragic knife fights in West Side Story to vengeful throat slitting in Sweeney Todd, the Sondheim-Prince collaboration stood at the apex of a period that redefined the musical tradition on Broadway yet again. By the end of the 1970s, inspired by the success of A Chorus Line, Broadway became the centerpiece of a new public relations campaign designed to attract tourists to New York. Suddenly, Broadway had become a major generator in the economic life of New York City. Hundreds of people from all over the world would go to the crossroads of the world, Times Square and 42nd Street. Why? To see a show.
These little town blues are melting away. We'll make a brand new start of it in old New York. If we can make it there, we'll make it anywhere. It's up to you, New York.
Come to New York and let's go on with the show.
There were commercials, I Love New York commercials on that showed bits and pieces of all of the different Broadway shows, from Cats to A Chorus Line to Follies, and all of the singers and the people representing New York in the commercials were all Broadway actors. This generator of revenue in New York also made it much more popular among the Wall Street crowd. It became the centerpiece of this new public relations campaign designed to attract tourists to New York. Increasingly, the tourist trade had dominated Broadway, favoring revivals and nostalgic entertainment for the people who were coming in from out of town. But the most successful shows in the years to come, in fact, the most successful in Broadway history, came from theaters in London, where a young British producer found a way to make the American musical a truly international phenomenon. Andrew Lloyd Webber. Now remember, Europe had a subsidized system, so he could develop his pieces under a subsidy and produce it on the west side of London and be able to fix it and change it without as much financial risk, maybe even half the financial risk. And once it was set, he would then bring it to Broadway. Stephen Sondheim did not have that kind of benefit. He had to make sure his work worked financially right off the bat. This is a bit of Cats. Cats played for so long that pretty much anybody that you know who's done theater has done Cats at one point or another. In fact, one of our instructors, Mark Holland, was in the Broadway production. I've done several productions in which I was the tap dance cat. Most of my friends have been one of the cats at one point or another. It ran a long time. Andrew Lloyd Webber, Baron Lloyd Webber, was born March 22nd, 1948, he was an English composer and impresario of musical theater. Several of his musicals have run for more than a decade, both in the West End and on Broadway. He's composed 27 musicals. He's composed a song cycle, a set of variations, 2 film scores, and a Latin Requiem Mass. Several of his songs have been widely recorded, like this one. And they were successful outside of their parent musicals, such as The Music of the Night and All I Ask of You from The Phantom of the Opera, I Don't Know How to Love Him from Jesus Christ Superstar, Don't Cry for Me, Argentina from Evita, Any Dream Will Do from Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, and of course Memory from Cats. In 2001, the New York Times referred to him as the most commercially successful composer in history. The Daily Telegraph ranked him the 5th most powerful person in British culture. In 2008, with lyricist Don Black writing, Andrew more or less single-handedly reinvented the musical, is what he thought. Now, mind you, he single-handedly reinvented the musical using a European subsidized system for the arts that we can only hope for and we can only wish for here in America. Once you set the piece in Europe, it's much easier to bring it to Broadway, where you already know it's going to work. It's already pleased audiences over here. While American composers were still struggling to find ways of working on a piece, putting it in front of an audience without the financial risk, which is why musicals like Hair and other musicals, Cabaret, used a workshop process where they did it small, then they took it off Broadway, then they moved it to Broadway, hoping that it would be able to survive the financial rigor of moving along. We will discuss production and other aspects of how musicals get brought to the public eye as we go along. I will see you on my courses. Don't forget those other bits and pieces. So you have a good day all day long. Bye-bye.